Story Corner, presented by Jennifer. Spirit Animals. Book 1, Wildborn. Chapter 8, The Island. By the glow of a large yellow moon, Abeke crept along the rooftops behind Uza, breathing softly. From her high vantage, she could see the lagoon where their ship had docked. The warm, humid air carried the rich smell of jungle foliage, mingled with the salty tang of the sea. According to Shang, they were on an island in the Gulf of Amaya, on the far side of the ocean from Nilo. She had secretly explored part of it on 2 previous outings, confirming that it was at least a peninsula. Since she had been asleep when the ship made port, tonight she would see for herself that she was truly on an island. Not that she doubted Shang. It just gave her something to do. She had never been on an island before. Uza leapt down from the roof to the top of a wall. It was not a serious drop, but the landing was barely 3 handspans wide. As Abeke paused, Uza looked back at her, eyes gleaming in the moonlight. Abeke felt a steady surge of ability. The tension departed from her muscles, leaving her relaxed and limber. Her balance steadied, and she concentrated on the night noise sounds of the island. Creatures scurrying, the call of a bird, and a harsh conversation below. Perhaps on a balcony, perhaps on the ground. Her vision sharpened in the low light, and she breathed a layer of scent in the air. Abeke landed lightly on the wall, then hurried to where it joined the outer wall of the complex. After climbing a little, she dangled from the wall and dropped to the sandy ground. Nobody had seen her escape. Not that it mattered. If she got caught, the only penalty would be the sting of failure. She was hungry for practice. Her training with Shane was useful but artificial. These nighttime excursions with Uza felt much more authentic. Akaba followed Uza into the fernery shadow world of tall trees with enormous leaves. She was not used to such lush vegetation, to vines and creepers, or to so many trees crowded together. But suppose the wetness in the air explained why plants thrived here. Since her arrival, it had already rained twice. Short, hard downfalls that came on with little warning and ended just as swiftly. Akaba wished that she could send some of the abundant water to her village. The stronghold where they were staying disappeared behind them, situated just inland from the sheltered inlet where the whale-towed ships were anchored. The walled outpost contained the only building she had found on the island. "Uza, this way," Akaba said, pointing. The leopard had been veering towards the highlands they had already explored. "I want to see the far side of the island." The big cat moved off in the desired direction. The rustling of shrubs and the cry of birds did little to disturb Akaba. She would never have ventured into this jungle alone at night, but with Uza at her side, she felt invincible. They prowled unhurriedly, whispering through the foliage like ghosts. Falling into an almost trance-like state, Akaba mimicked Uza, pausing when she paused, advancing when she advanced. Through their bond, Akaba studied the leopard's techniques while borrowing her sharper senses and innate stealth. After some time, they emerged from the trees to climb a long slope that grew steeper as they followed it. The bushes were smaller here, affording Akaba a long view of the dark forest behind her. The lights of the little outpost reduced to orange specks near the lagoon. From the bare ridgetop, Akaba got her first view of the far side of the island. The opposite slope descended sharply into the sea. By the moonlight, she could discern the coastline, partly shielded from the open water by long sandbars. There was no other land in sight. Her eyes were drawn to a pale beach in a centered cove, due to the presence of two bonfires. To blaze so brightly at this distance, the fires had to be an impressive size. Figures moved on the beach, dark specks occasionally illuminated by the firelight. "Look down there," Akaba said. "Who could that be?" Crouching low, Uza watched warily beside her. Akaba squinted, straining her sight. "Hard to tell from up here. They're a long ways from the outpost. Could it be pirates? Shane said all ships have to watch out for pirates lately." Uza remained still beside her. Akaba wondered if Shane's people knew they were sharing the island. Could the figures on the beach pose a threat? It seemed unlikely. There were dozens of people at the sturdy outpost, many of them armed soldiers, and most with spirit animals. 3 big ships waited in the lagoon. Shane had mentioned others coming soon. Distinguished visitors. Could it be them on the beach? Wouldn't visitors come directly to the outpost? "I don't like this," Akaba murmured. "I don't want to risk anybody sneaking up on Shane and his people. Think we could get close without being spotted?" In reply, Uza flicked her tail and stared down the slope towards the cove. Akaba followed, and started down the slope towards the cove. Akaba followed. Soon they passed beneath the trees again. Akaba took extra care to move silently. This was no longer a game. The people on the beach could be dangerous. A balmy breeze ruffled the surrounding leaves, bringing the faint smell of smoke. Akaba welcomed the breeze. It would further disguise any sound they made. After a considerable hike, the smoke grew stronger, and Akaba could hear distant conversations. Then, from up ahead, a shriek pierced the night. A second shriek came, less stringent, followed by a third. Akaba held her breath, kneeling down beside Uza. The cries stopped. The shrieks had not sounded human, nor did they match any animal she could think of. but they had sounded desperate. Uza started forward again. They advanced more, cautiously than ever, a little at a time, finally coming within sight of the beach. Together, Akaba and Uza crept as close as they dared, gazing out from the last of the dense foliage beneath the shadows of the tree. The twin bonfires burned wide and tall, like small huts accidentally set ablaze. By the rippling light, Akaba saw 6 large cages, and perhaps 10 men. 4 of the cages contained monstrous beasts. One was feathery, one some gargantuan bird of prey. Another had quills like a porcupine, but was nearly the size of a buffalo. A third held a huge coiled snake, probably some kind of constrictor, and the fourth housed what appeared to be a muscular rat big enough to bring down an antelope. An ordinary dog paced inside one of the other cages, looking small and scared compared to the neighboring monstrosities. A 6th cage stood empty. A man in a hooded cloak approached the empty cage with a rat in his hand. The rodent was big, but nothing like the unnatural rat nearby. "Let's double the amount on this one and check for differences," he said. "Large or small, a dose is a dose," a bald man protested. "We have plenty," the hooded man countered. "We lost the parrot, so we have an extra cage. Let's find out firsthand." Akaba had to strain, but she felt sure she had heard the words correctly. The hooded man produced a water skin and upended it over the mouth of the rat in his hand. The rat squirmed, tail whipping from side to side. "That's enough," one of the other men growled. "Cage it," another man demanded. "Not yet," the hooded man said, capping the water skin. "If I'm too hasty, it'll run out between the bars." He held out the rat for the other men to see. It wriggled in his grasp, seeming to swell. It began to squirm harder, screeching in pain. The hooded man turned and stuffed the rat between the bars of the empty cage. The rodent withered on the cage floor, new flesh bursting out from its fur. It let out a tortured shriek that Akaba recognized. It squealed one more time, then lunged against the bars, its enlarged body bloated with muscle. The rat tested the bars several times, rocking the cage and kicking up sand before settling down. Akaba could hardly trust her eyes. What would Shane think when she told him about this? Would he believe her? She glanced over at Uza. "You're my only witness," she whispered. "You see this, don't you? It isn't natural. What did they give it?" Uza only looked her way for an instant, then returned her attention to the beach. "What did I tell you?" the bald man said. "A dose is a dose. The amount doesn't matter." This one is a little larger," the hooded man said, "and if you ask me, the transformation took less time." "Waste of effort. Let's finish this." "This last one should be the simplest," the hooded man said. "Admiral is well trained. He may even remain so after the bile." I'll believe it when I see it," the bald man said. The hooded man held up his water skin. "Get ready to eat your words." He walked over to the cage with the dog inside. "Sit, Admiral." The dog sat. "Speak." The dog barked and wagged its tail. The hooded man uncapped the water skin and held it between the bars. "Come." The dog came forward and the man poured fluid into its mouth. Akaba could see some splashing free. Then he backed away. Several other men stepped closer to the cage, warily clutching long spears. One held a bow with an arrow set to the string. Akaba didn't want to watch, but couldn't take her eyes away from the sight of the dog convulsing and enlarging. It didn't cry out like the rat, but it whined softly. As the dog changed, its muscles pulled taut, bulging grotesquely. Its eyes grew fierce and wise, and foam began frothing from the corners of its mouth. The dog let out a low growl before launching itself against the side of the cage, very nearly toppling it over. "Sit, Admiral," the hooded man called from a distance. The monstrous dog shifted into a sitting position. "Speak." The beefy dog let out a powerful bark that resonated through the jungle, sending birds flying from the trees. "Good boy, Admiral," the hooded man called. "Good boy." "I'm impressed." All right, I'm impressed," the bald man admitted. "But I wouldn't let it out without a leash." Some of the other men chuckled. Most still held their weapons cautiously. A swirling breeze stirred the air. Suddenly, the dog whipped its head towards the jungle, staring directly at Akaba. It let out a rumbling growl. Some of the men glanced in the direction the dog was staring. Akaba resisted the urge to immediately retreat. If she moved while their eyes were on her, she would give herself away for sure. She had to rely on the leaves and the shadows. The dog's growl built into a series of vicious barks. "What is it, Admiral?" the hooded man called, following the animal's gaze. The huge dog barked more fiercely. "No, no, no," Akaba whispered. The dog began to savagely ram inside the cage. The men were shouting to each other, but Akaba couldn't make out their words under the noise. Barking and thrashing, the dog went into a frenzy. The cage shuddered violently. The dog began bashing the roof, and the wood began to crack and splinter. Akaba felt sharp teeth on her arms. Uza was gently biting her. Once Akaba noticed her, the leopard slunk back deeper into the trees. Akaba joined her retreat. The wild clamor continued behind her, and then there was a violent crack. Glancing over her shoulder, Akaba saw the enormous hound crash through the roof of the cage, the bars falling away in all directions. Ignoring the men, some of whom made half-hearted jabs with their spears, the monstrous dog raced straight towards Akaba, spewing sand with each massive stride. Uza broke into a run, with Akaba sprinting beside her. All pretense at stealth abandoned, Akaba tore through the jungle, wishing she had brought some more weaponry than a knife. Then again, what good would any weapon do against the savage dog? The animal stampeded behind them. Ferocious barks and growls impelled Akaba forward. There was no time to strategize. She ran with everything she had, driven by pure terror. The same terrain that had permitted her to creep alongside Uza now tripped her up. Branches lashed her body, roots grabbed her ankles, and the uneven ground was treacherous. She stumbled to her knees several times and fell flat once, but always rose as quickly as she could, clawing at vegetation, half running, half swimming through the leaves. The gigantic dog was gaining rapidly. Any moment those teeth would seize her. She had lost sight of Uza. The dog was nearly upon her. Determined not to be an easy victim, Akaba drew her knife and whirled. Her senses abruptly sharpened. She saw the overgrown canine coming and shrank into a comfortable crouch. As it lunged, she sprung sideways, swinging her knife. The tip of the blade scratched the brute's flank as the beast blurred past her. Akaba put a tree between herself and the dog. It struck the tree with enormous force to shake the jungle, but the trunk held. Akaba raced away, but the frothing dog pursued her relentlessly. She tripped, rolled onto her back, and held her knife in desperation. The dog surged forward, mouth gaping, teeth huge in the darkness. With a screaming roar unlike any cry Akaba had ever heard, Uza hurtled out of the night, her jaws closing on the side of the dog's neck. The impact broke the dog's rushing attack. Leopard and dog tumbled together in the darkness, narrowly missing Akaba, snarling and spitting, teeth flashing, claws slashing. Akaba's first instinct was to run. Her second thought was to help Uza. But then she got the distinct impression she should climb. The notion came so strongly that she leapt to the nearest tree, embracing the trunk with arms and knees. There were no branches to grip, but she pulled with her arms and clamped with her knees, somehow heaving herself higher and higher. At last she found short limbs where she could rest. Behind her, she saw Uza had taken to the trees as well, a red wound mirroring her magnificent pelt. Below, the frustrated dog barked and bayed and finally howled. Akaba's tree shook as the dog rammed it with manic tendencies. She held tight. She had lost her knife. Her only hope was to outlast her attacker. Something caught the dog's attention, and it ran over to another tree. Dimly, in the leaf-filtered moonlight, Akaba saw a figure high in the branches. It held a bow and was launching arrow after arrow at the dog. The huge dog leapt, barked, and growled. It clawed futilely at the trunk. No matter how many arrows found their mark, it didn't seek cover. Finally, with a slow inevitability, the arrows did their job. The creature sank back, took 2 wobbly steps, then collapsed on the forest floor with a penitent whine. The figure climbed down from the tree. He paused beside the rapidly shrinking dog, then came to the base of Akaba's trees. "Come on down, Akaba," a harsh voice called. She knew that voice. "It's dead. Come down. We need to go." Hugging the tree trunk, Akaba shinnied down the tree and dropped to the ground. "Shane, how did you find me?" "Did you think I'd let you roam the jungle alone at night?" he replied. "You followed me?" "Not so loud," Shane warned, looking away from the trees. "I'd rather the men on the beach not find us." "The men," Akaba said, lowering her voice. "They made the dog into a monster. They fed it something." "I know about them," Shane said. I didn't know they were here tonight until it was too late. Otherwise, I would have steered you away." "How far back were you?" "Too far. I tried not to make my presence known, although I'm sure I never fooled your leopard." "What are those men doing?" "They're trying to find a replacement for the nectar. They try out their concoctions in secret." "The nectar doesn't create monsters." "These men are testing different substances," Shane said. "I don't know all their goals. It would not end well if they caught us. We should go." Uza prowled into view, her side bleeding. Crouching beside her leopard, Akaba flung her arms around her neck. "Thank you," Akaba murmured. "You saved my life."